Well, welcome. Tonight we've got too many topics to even pick one to start. But we're going to look at the world from the liberal side. So why don't we start with introductions?
Okay. My name's Rand Barthel, and I live in Mendon, and I'm a member of the Mendon Democratic Town Committee.
I'm Carolyn Barthel, also from the Mendon Democratic Town Committee, and I'm a climate activist.
I'm Lisa Mosinski, and I'm a member of the Democratic State Committee and co-chair of the Rural Issues Subcommittee, and happy to be here talking about rural issues as well.
You have to start with 800,000 people at risk. I asked you before the show, and I'll ask again. Is the White House being brilliant on this move? You know, saying, okay, we promised the far right we would deal with immigration. So we're going to change the rules, but hint, hint, Congress, I'm not going to implement it for 6 months. So go do the right thing. I mean, I don't understand. If President Trump believed it should happen, why would he hint, hint, Congress, go fix it in 6 months?
That's because John Kelly suggested it.
What we hear is that, or what I have heard is that John Kelly suggested it because Trump was asking his staff for some kind of a way out of this bind that he got himself into by promising all of these crazy things about we're going to throw all of the immigrants out of the country to his base.
Now,
So he may be getting himself out of a problem
One of the most
but it's a
level-headed
problem
people
he caused himself in the first
that
place.
we have in the area is our chief of police, Tom O'Laughlin. And he once told me on the show, don't argue whether you can hermetically seal the United States, but let's just assume Star Trek comes down and makes a force field and you can't get in or out. He says, now, to remove 11 million
people
would take you, through due process, 84 years. That's assuming they don't reproduce, that 11 million people don't reproduce and no others get in.
Right.
So is this really, I mean, I'm wondering if Trump didn't figure out that he can't win this one, but maybe he can keep from taking a loss?
He's appealing to his base, but the whole 6 months proposition of postponing, giving a deadline for 6 months, gives him an out. So he's still appealing to his base, but he's still giving some timeline so that there theoretically could be a solution to this that would actually appeal to the rest of the country.
Now, is he really appealing to his whole base? I mean, half the country
That's what they keep
voted for
saying.
him.
He's a little bit less than half. And a lot of them are no longer with him also. And so we're really talking about the kind of the 35-ish% who are still with him. And he's probably trying to hang on to them while, you know, now that it is about to become apparent that he can't actually do this thing that he promised them to do.
You know, when I think about it, I mean, one of the things I did agree with President Obama is that you should focus on the people who are committing crimes. And now you could argue technically being an illegal immigrant, you're a criminal, you're illegal. Okay. But many of the people, I'd say, you know, the 99%, don't cause problems.
They're here to work and make money and sometimes send some of the money home to their families in places like Mexico and
wherever it
and
is,
they're
they're
trying
here to
build a
make a
future
better
for
life for their
themselves,
family.
which is what everybody else who came here did.
Actually, the Dreamers are 90% employed, or working, or going to school or whatever. They are positively contributing to. They're paying their taxes. They're contributing to their communities. There was an instance of one of the Dreamers who was rescuing people down in Houston, and he died. He drowned.
He drowned before he could be deported.
Yeah.
But you know, here's what I guess stumps me. You know, when you think about, you know, I say I'm Portuguese. Somebody was to ask me, it's always amazing. Nobody says, you know, until recently, I'm American. It was, well, what's your heritage? Well, I'm Portuguese. I was born in Milford. I was raised in Milford. I visited Portugal a number of times. But if you ever sent me to Portugal to live, I'd have to totally recalibrate everything known to
Start
me.
over.
So now I think of, the kid, or, I joked about my daughter, my oldest. We moved her from Virginia to Milford when she was 1.5 years old. Tell her she's a Virginian. I mean, every thought, every memory she's had for the last, 29 years has been Milford. She couldn't remember anything about Virginia.
Right.
No.
Well, and so that which
So-
just shows how insane it is, the idea that somehow we're going to send people back, quote unquote, to countries that they don't actually know because they came here when they were maybe 3 years old, and that don't have a place for them.
But even if they had a place, Rand, if you said, I'm going to send you back to where, Texas? Where you moved in when you were 2 or snuck in?
Yeah.
But what do we really gain by chasing out these kids who are now, I think we keep saying kids, but that in my mind is a fallacy. What's the average age, 25?
Yeah, a range in the 20s.
So you got 20-year-old productive U.S., well, I can't say citizens, but they're acting like
who grew
citizens.
up and were raised and grew up as Americans and went
Right.
to American schools and are now, involved in the American scene through work or education or whatever it is they're doing.
But don't I feel better about a kid who grew up here, followed the rules, got a degree, is working, paying taxes, versus somebody who just happened to be born here by accident or whatever? They were just born here and they're criminals. And I
Yeah,
sit
I
there
mean-
and say, which one do I want?
Yeah. It's almost like, how can we get more of those people?
Yeah.
Wouldn't they be good to have?
But maybe part of the question that we should be asking is not what do we gain from this strategy, because I don't believe we gain anything. I think we are doing ourselves a huge disservice throughout the world. But I think we have to pull back and say, what does Mr. Trump gain by announcing this today? And I think over and over again, we see him trying to diffuse and deflect against the investigation into Russia and his money. So I think it's all about.
Think so?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's a
Because
distraction.
it seemed like Russia went away real fast
It hasn't
when
gone
all of a
at all.
sudden they started talking about some of the previous administration's games too.
No, he's just doing a distraction.
Because we haven't heard about Russia in so long.
Well,
Oh, yeah, there's
we have.
plenty.
It's almost
Bob
daily.
Mueller, as the special
Yeah.
prosecutor, has his nose to the grindstone. He is pushing really hard. The 3 committees are pushing really hard. They're going to start to intensify their investigations this fall. In fact, they're competing for each other's, hearings to have certain people come in. It's not going away. Trump may be trying to distract the rest of the country, but Bob Mueller is not distracted.
Thing is that Mueller is running quite a tight ship, which means that there's not a lot of news directly coming out.
leaks.
You don't get leaks. Now you get a bit of news when you discover that, oh yeah, they executed a search warrant on Paul Manafort's house and they woke him up at 3 o'clock in the morning and well, that's kind of news, But a lot of what's going on doesn't generate news until it generates news.
Am I being silly in believing that Trump realized he cannot win on this argument, but by deflecting it, he can not take a loss?
Well, I think from a tactical point of view, you're correct.
That's why I said it's a brilliant move, because I'm sitting there saying, okay, I'm going to go after 800,000 entities that most people would think are Americans. And 90-some% of them are good Americans. I can probably find a couple of the
Oh, yeah.
dreamers that are not so nice.
I heard that Haley, she's on MSNBC, Haley, whatever her name is, she was arguing with somebody at Breitbart, and it's 1/2% of the dreamers who have been problematic and who actually have been convicted of a crime.
But I mean, if you look, 1% of the population.
Yeah.
1%,
Just-
1/2 of 1%.
No, but I'm just saying, if you just looked and said 1% of the population, not illegal, just
Right.
300 million people living in the USA
Right.
under some form. Okay, so 3 million of them, if you said those are doing bad things, well, how many in our
Well, that
jails?
actually maps pretty well to our prison population.
How many in our jails? That's what I'm
Yeah,
saying.
it's about that number. It's
So
on that
saying
same order
that-
of magnitude.
Dang, these dreamers, they have the same percentage of nightmares as we have of general. Okay, I'd buy that.
I think which really kind of highlights what's under the cover that we're not really talking about yet here, which is that this entire impulse to get tough with these people and throw them out is fundamentally racist in origin,
And white supremacy.
because
See, now that I've got a real hard time believing, because I keep hearing that this white supremacist thing is driving. I mean, almost 50% of the country, and you can argue it's 40%, but I have a hard time believing that 40% of this country really believes in the fecal matter that the the white supremacists are spreading around the world.
Well,
Well, there are degrees of it. There's the virulent variety, and then there's the sort of gussied up a little bit for polite company variety of it.
Well, I mean, it seems like about every 8 years.
But I mean, the idea that that I think it goes back somewhat to the idea of scarcity and the idea that society is a zero-sum game, and that anything they get is something that we don't get, and that kind of thinking, which is connected to a racist perspective, because how do you identify who we are and who they are? Well,
We is us, and they are everybody else that I can blame.
right.
It's a lot easier to blame Lisa, saying the reason I'm not
that you
succeeding,
don't have
Right.
a.
it's your fault.
Exactly.
Right.
That's
And you
Right.
sit there and say, okay, if you run out of Jews to blame, you'll pick Muslims. You run out of Muslims to blame. Pretty soon,
Soon as you
poor
start
old Roman Catholics
Yep.
are going to be right on the list saying,
And you know what? Some of those far-right groups, they have it in for the Catholics, too.
of course,
Yeah.
the Pope. They're not a big fan of the Pope. So, you sit there and say, to me, that's one of those diseases that I don't know how to fix. When people start blaming everybody else for their lives.
Right. When you start asking, not what could I do better, but who did this to me?
Right.
That's when you have
It's
crossed
victimhood.
over into.
No, you think about it, about every 8 years, the skinheads come through Milford. And the best
Who comes from Milford?
skinheads.
skinheads, the white supremacist with their newspapers, because you get the fecal matter sprinkled all over Milford. Because that's all that's in there, is fecal matter. And the best thing I've seen Milfordians do is turn their back, ignore them. It's like a stray cat. You don't feed them, they move on. The worst thing you can do is give them any attention, in my mind, because then they'll stay.
I don't. Well,
But the victimhood is also a product of the lack of equity, economic parity that we have in this society. Because over the last 8 years, over the last 12 years, you've seen this incredible gap just spread. The differential is so huge now between those folks who had the 1% who have so much that they could never spend their money in their lifetime, and the rest. We're fighting in Massachusetts a ballot question to make sure everybody's paid $15 an hour minimum wage. I mean, $15 an hour, what's the big deal with that? And we have people who are making huge sums of money. We have Boston with incredible resources. The state should be flourishing at $15 an hour, yet we have to work to put it on the ballot to get people to vote to agree that that's the minimum wage. I think it's absurd.
But do you believe that cutting the senior staff's pay will result in the lower employee payroll going up?
I'm not sure if you mean senior staff as in government or as in private sector.
No, I'm CEO, something with a C, because it all seems like,
The
okay,
Cs,
the
yeah.
Cs.
Right,
When you,
I'm not sure that's possible. That is, there's a relationship somewhere, but Those folks should be advocating that all of their people are paid $15 an hour and up. The point is that the difference between the working people and those CEOs is massive, 300%.
Oh,
What,
I've seen
300
percentages in
300 times, yeah.
thousands.
300
I'm
times
sorry,
to three.
Yes, 300
Yeah.
times and more. Everybody puts their pants on the same way. That's just wrong in a country that is arguing these things. And so if we had more economic parity, if we had the ability, and it goes for women too, everybody has an equal chance at the door to get a foot up, then I think you'd see things different. We would see things differently. But we don't have that. And it's never been, capitalism and its relationship with democracy has not been about
And Lisa,
parity.
I'm in an industry that, candidly, the gender doesn't hit us. When you have sales reps, nobody cares whether you're man, woman,
Or something
they care
else.
about your numbers,
Right.
right? Are you producing? And if you produce, you get. I've always been amazed because, you know, if you look at some of these people who don't believe in equity in pay, well, wait a minute, aren't they married?
Well,
Don't they have children?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How,
Do they have
how
daughters?
could I wish that my darling bride be paid less for the same job if we were doing identical jobs?
But here it is, 2017.
But in the
And-
numbers,
Right.
I'll give in that the numbers say it's like world peace. You know, I mean, how could I hope that my daughters would grow up to make less money than
Right.
two random males doing the same job? It hits me, and it's like, wait a minute, how can you even do that? I could never consciously, and I hope I never do it unconsciously, but say, okay, Rand, I'm going to pay you $1.50, but you only rate $1.40. Wait a minute.
So you're preaching to the converted.
No,
here,
I
of course.
understand, but it stuns me that
It is difficult to
That's-
enter into the mindset that would not see that as a problem and as an injustice.
my job is to bring the best return to our stockholders that I can. Not to bring the best return using males.
Right.
Nobody cares whether you have 50-50, 49, 50, you know, are you getting the best, most qualified people?
They just want to see the green.
Of course.
No, and I think there are employers and leadership out there that speaks exactly that. But at the same time, you still have this disparity. And until we level the playing field and make it so that people get paid the same across the board and get paid a living wage, we're going to see this gap widen and widen.
Well, I mean, paid across the board to me is a different issue because every job description and pay band I've ever seen is a number. It doesn't say if you're a woman, here's your pay bands. So
So how does that figure still come out every year?
Lisa, that's what I'm saying. I don't understand. It seems like such an alien concept.
So it has to be more subtle than just having, well, you know, we pay if you've got an M in front of your name, we pay you a male bonus. It's not like that. It's actually a mixture of who gets advanced to what kinds of positions and
that may
all
be
that
how they
kind of
play
stuff.
the game.
And-
It's a combination of
and
many
who gets
things.
taken seriously in
right?
different ways
Yep.
Yeah.
in the professions.
But my point is, in 2017, you know, if you look at the State House, you still have a far more number of males representing us than females.
Yep.
And if you look at the pay scale, if you split it by gender, it's still not equal. And then, so fundamentally, we need to have things on a more equal basis in people's work, in the workforce, so that people feel empowered to be able to compete and be able to have a way to support their families. Because
and Lisa,
otherwise it's just divide.
I just don't understand because, you know, I look at the industry I'm in. You could not rationally say you're worth more because of an alternate plumbing structure. I'm sorry.
Doesn't make any sense in my
Makes no
business either.
fracking sense at all. And why? If you're more qualified and you're going to get me better results than him, why would I ever choose him?
Because you might go out for 9 months on maternity leave.
Okay, I might go out for 9 months on an injury.
Right,
Yes?
right.
Yeah.
All of those things. can happen.
Okay.
But, I mean, this is ingrained gender bias that's been there for a long time. My point is, in 2017, we got to do better to get rid of it.
Well, I mean, our
And instead, our
senator,
leadership is looking
our
at,
Senator Fatman was pushing a bill about, it was just rational thinking about pregnant women. That, you know, for a period of time,
Right.
if you're in a role where you're, you know, I lift things up, I put things down. Well, okay, make a rational accommodation. Well, again, I would hope
why
that,
do we need a law to do that?
yeah, and that's the sad
Yeah,
part.
yeah, it's silly that we
See,
need.
I would hope somebody would look and say, that could be my wife, my daughter. You know, I would hope that somebody would be a rational person dealing with my family. So why wouldn't I also deal with somebody else's family that way?
Right.
That's the part that just absolutely, I guess, stuns me. You know, I mean, I know my darling bride married down. She's a biochemist. She's smarter than me. I mean, when we were out doing scientific equipment, I sold them, I installed them, she trained them. And she did a much better job because she knew the chemistry better than I did. She knew the math better than I did. Frankly, in the training role, she would be worth more than me. You know, I mean, the selling role, it may be different. But how could you ever say, no, I want to get somebody that is not as effective?
Right. We answer that question,
Yeah.
you know.
But again, the numbers I'm a scientist by training. The numbers don't lie.
Right.
The numbers still say in 2017, the female population in general is paid less than the male.
Yep.
Makes no sense.
And we were talking about how we have a ballot question just to have the minimum wage at $15 an hour. And that's a big fight.
But see, now the question on that is, the federal minimum is $7.75 an hour, correct?
I thought it was higher than that.
Is it?
I don't,
Maybe the federal, all right.
At the
maybe
federal
Federal,
level,
yeah.
I think the
That's
states have
pretty
turned
low.
around and said,
the states
yeah,
have their own minimum.
maybe if you live in, anybody from Montana that's watching, or Idaho, I'm sorry, but if you live in the mountains of Montana, maybe you can get by on $7.75 an hour. But
Yeah, I don't.
Here in,
Dunkin' Donuts had a sign that they're paying $11 or $12 an hour. I mean, doesn't the market, let me put it to you, doesn't the market adjust to what's real?
I got an email recently, last day or so, where they were talking about, would you be willing to pay a little bit more for a Dunkin' Donuts coffee or something like that to be able to have people pay for, get paid $15 an hour?
Why do we have to take it out of the customers' pockets? We are looking at CEOs who make
Versus-
billions of dollars,
right.
so,
Versus
you
the
know,
CEOs
they don't
and
want to adjust their
shareholders.
bottom line, but they're going to pass it on to us.
Right.
and the thing that's also so silly is that, you know, Henry Ford, who was a visionary businessman, realized fairly early on that he needed his workers to be able to buy his product, and that he wasn't going to get to where he wanted to be with his product unless his workers could buy it.
And now, is the $15 an hour minimum working in all areas?
Some states have $15. I thought some of them enacted it. I don't know off the top
No,
of
I
my
mean,
head.
like, I think it's New York City and some of the places
Those
that,
Seattle.
are the
Seattle
highest
enacted
places.
it.
The cost
Seattle
of living
has.
is astronomical there.
and I guess the question I would have is, what effect?
I saw an article and I didn't, all I really saw was the headline, was that it was not, Seattle was having a tough time with it. I don't know why that was. I didn't get a chance to read the article. It could be because of the surrounding area outside of Seattle would not be paying $15 an hour. I don't know what the rationale
I think some of the
was.
small businesses were saying, I'm spending X dollars on payroll. Okay, if I got to spend 15 an hour instead of 12, I'm just not going to hire as
Is there
many
a limit,
people.
though, on the amount of people you have before you're required to pay the $15
Well, there's
an hour?
always the thing with, a lot of the rules, even in Massachusetts, if you're under 25 people or you're under 50, some of the onerous accounting rules don't kick in.
Right.
And that would make sense if you're small, but I would argue that, and I don't know, but the people who have small businesses that don't have a lot of staff they probably run real lean, and they probably pay their workers fairly well, so it's not a matter of entry-level jobs. I think what we're talking about here, $15 an hour, we're talking about these entry-level jobs a lot of times, that they're expecting people to work for really peanuts. And the argument is that at $15 an hour, if you make less than that, you're working 40 hours a week. If you're still below the poverty line, it doesn't make sense.
$15 an hour is what, 30 grand?
Before taxes?
If you're working
Gross.
full-time. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying, if you're working 2,080 hours a year,
Assuming you're
normal-
getting the 40 hours, and a lot of these places obviously don't hire
but
full-time.
even if you're getting 30 grand, that's kind of tough to raise a family, especially
It
in
sure is.
Massachusetts.
Yeah.
It is.
Have fun
Without
finding a
still
place to live.
falling back on food stamps or other subsidies to kind of make ends meet, in which case
Which means
they're
we're
pushing
kidding
it back.
ourselves about the.
Right. They're pushing it back on us, on the taxpayers, to supplement their business, basically, is what that's how I'm reading it.
Yeah, I'm just curious to find out, okay, if they did raise $15 an hour in a certain area, what effect did it have on the businesses, on the people?
So the other thing that I don't think business thinks about, and I don't think the government thinks about, is like, why don't we pass a transportation infrastructure bill? Because if we raise somebody's hourly, or if we pass a transportation infrastructure bill, those people have more money to go spend. This is a benefit to the business, not just to the fact that they can afford to buy their families good food and decent clothes and everything, but they're spending more money, which is lifting the economy up for everybody. And that, I think, is a fundamental message that's always pushed to the back when we start talking about raising a minimum wage or equity issues. It's good for everybody.
It's funny because I think, wasn't it Reagan that talked about that trickle-down effect? That,
Yeah.
I think it was called piss down.
Well, yeah, but now you're talking about, okay, if we do it again, it'll work this time.
Well, but he was talking about a different thing. He wasn't talking about raising the minimum wage. He was talking about taking care of the upper echelon.
No, I understand, but it's
And then-
still the same idea that if you put more money at some level,
Yeah,
know,
but
that-
see, I don't agree with that, and here's why. I think that we found that if you put more money, give the 1% more tax breaks, they hold on to that money. They
warehouse it.
don't invest it back into the economy at all.
They send it offshore.
Right, or they send it offshore. I think when you're talking about people who are not making much, who don't have a lot of disposable income, they're going to spend every bit they make on living, because right now they're struggling or working a number of jobs. They also find that businesses has less turnover, which means a lot more stable workforce, which means that you save money in the long run because you don't have the retraining that you have to do. So, there's a lot of, the benefits are long-term, though. They're not going to be felt immediately.
I still can't get my arms around real data that says, I know I'm looking for a sales rep, okay? It's going to cost me $75,000, $80,000 minimum base. Why would I pay $80,000 minimum base? Because that's what it costs to get the high-level talent
Get somebody
I want.
you need, who actually knows how to do
So
this
you
stuff.
sit there and say, okay, if I pay $12, why would Dunkin' Donuts pay $12 an hour?
Because they can. Because they can.
But if they could pay $7 an hour, they'd probably pay $7.
That's right,
But they
they would.
can't.
Yeah.
Right.
That's why we have a thing
But we-
called minimum wage, because people would pay less if they could.
Yeah, but even minimum wage, I guess, is our minimum wage $12 an hour?
No,
I don't know
it's
what-
No.
I don't know what it is.
I don't
I thought it was
think so.
11. Did they
Nine.
raise it up to 11?
Yeah, but see, I see 12. So to me, it's got to be the
But
market
that's-
saying if you want to
Yes.
get quality people, keep quality people.
It makes it more competitive.
Well, the other
sure.
thing is that finally, it seems that we've got the official unemployment rate down below 5%, and it is actually finally starting to be more of a challenge for people to hire.
One of the biggest problems we've
And-
discussed for a long time in Massachusetts is attracting and keeping qualified people.
What kind of jobs are we?
Biotech is driving this state. If you look at it, I know you'll hate me, but it's not the heavy-duty manufacturing jobs anymore.
No,
No.
they're
There are
gone.
not a lot of Milford shoes, Porter shoe, Bickford shoe, Milford shoe. You know, in the 40s, that drove Milford. Draper,
Right.
foundry, looms. You don't see those. You start seeing high tech, biotech. You know, and
But
it's
it's very
getting
concentrated in the Boston area.
yes.
You don't have biotech out in Pittsfield.
No,
You know, so the western part of the state still doesn't have broadband
Yeah.
across the board.
yeah.
I
is
know
insane.
we've talked,
Yeah,
we've
it
talked
doesn't
about
have
this
it.
before, but this is it's the hidden face of Massachusetts that is more like the western part of the country, not western
But you know,
Massachusetts.
you're starting to see, I mean, when you look at everything, the mecca for biotech was Cambridge.
It still is.
But
Yeah.
now you're seeing Lexington. Why? Because in Cambridge, when I went looking for space, it was $74 a square foot. Gulp. Brighton, I got 22.
Yep.
But the other problem is your transportation infrastructure, okay, with the MBTA and everything, and the T. I guess the red line today was just gridlock everywhere. It was awful. That's your main feeder into Cambridge. So I think folks are, the CEOs are looking at it and saying, hey, I want my employees to be happy. A happy employee, a well-paid employee is a better employee. They can't live nearby. It's a hassle
Well,
to get in and out.
that's how Worcester's growing.
Right.
People are sitting
So-
there saying, you know, if I'm paying 55, 60 grand for an operator, out in Worcester, they can afford to live close.
Right.
You're not, I mean, when I look at what rents cost in the North End, these young kids who have just graduated, where are they getting $3 grand a month for an apartment in the North End? But,
Probably a 15 to an apartment, though.
well, but
Yeah, exactly.
They sleep in shifts.
they're doing it,
Stacked.
you know. So one way or another, the market has to adjust.
We
Right.
just like to help the market along because you got this push and pull against the the bottom line for companies versus getting good employees. There's got to be a balance.
But see, you know, the same thing happens with the CEOs. I'm always amazed because everybody says you should cut their pay, but not my company. Because I need somebody to grow. And the fundamental issue I have with CEO pay is it's not performance driven.
That's right. Yeah, I
See,
agree.
Lisa, you'll hate me, but I don't mind somebody making $10 million a year
I don't either.
if their stock value
But-
went through the roof.
But
Well,
no,
and,
but-
and if they did that in a way that was sustainable, not sort of a flash in the pan
Well,
because,
yes.
because they manipulated the market.
No, but when
Yeah.
if Lee Iacocca, I never resented him making a blessed fortune off Chrysler stock because he took $1 salary and took $1 million in stock, which at that point was worth pennies. So when he turned Chrysler around for the millions of stockholders and they all made a bunch of money, I didn't feel bad that he made a ton of money. What kills me is when you see CEO pay going up and their stock value in the company's performance going down.
Right.
I'd like to see him kick or her kick back money.
Well, that's what we're talking about with the
So-
McDonald's and the 15, an hour. You got these CEOs making, astronomical amounts of money. Good for them. That's not the issue. The issue is that they're not willing to adjust at all, or they're not willing to, enhance the company in other ways besides just lining their pockets. And, I think that, and wages have been flat for so long too. So these CEOs, they've gone up. If we look at their salaries, it's gone up precipitously compared to everybody's, and we're doing more with less. When
Well,
it
and
trickles down.
there's a lot of gamesmanship in the system.
Yeah.
I mean, I think corporate governance is a swamp that somebody needs to drain. So to coin
What
a
an
phrase.
interesting concept.
Well,
That's
you
a
think
brilliant
about
idea.
it, the part that annoys me the most is when you have board members who are making a lot of money.
Yeah.
Now, board members are supposed to be there to protect the rights of
The shareholders.
stockholders.
Yes.
Okay, but they're on the compensation committee, so they're giving better and better comp plans.
Sure.
And that way they get more support to stay. Again, I have no issue with them saying, Lisa, you're going to be CEO. If you raise the price of our stock this much, for everybody, you get this much.
But should it only be based on stock?
It's-
Because you can raise it
it's-
this much with but by destroying your labor force, by paying them
Yeah,
nothing.
but that
I
won't
mean,
work, because eventually, if you start abusing your
The
company.
key word there is eventually, because a lot of this is so short-term, the way it is, the way it
They
is
only go
figured.
from quarter to quarter.
Yeah.
There's no lifetime investment in a company.
Which is-
exactly, that's
There's
what's
no
gone.
long-term focus about, gee, you know, I want to build this like Lee Iacocca. You know, he had a long-term plan. The man was invested. He took $1, bought a lot of stock. There was an incentive
But
for
he
him.
made a lot of people a lot of money in the stockholders and saved a lot of people's livelihood.
Oh, sure.
Sure did.
The worker bees of the UAW.
It was a holistic approach to the
Yes.
company, not
And
just
see,
self-serving.
I'll never hold it against that guy that whatever he made, God bless him, do it
Okay,
again.
so who's your Lee Iacocca today?
I don't know, I'd have to really think through
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, but
Stephen Jobs?
I guess what
know, when
I'm
I think
looking
of the-
for is
I don't know
before he
how
died?
I don't know how his company was run, though.
why don't we have more Lee Iacocas today instead of fewer? And I think we have very few.
Yeah.
But that's up to the stockholders. I mean,
But
that's
who
a,
all just want a better return on their investment, which we can't blame them for.
Well, I mean,
but long-term,
Right.
they've got to lean to make sure that that investment isn't this year.
So where's their incentive? What's the motivation?
Yeah, and there's the problem
There
is
is
we
none.
talked about, you know, climate activist. Well, global warming is a fallacy in my lifetime of 2-year view. I'm a congressman. I'm trying to live for 24
That's
months,
basically the thinking.
right?
My
until
husband's
a- all
Hurricane Harvey
short-term.
comes along and puts your house underwater.
Yeah, but barring a catastrophic event,
Right.
if I take a data point tight enough,
I know.
I can argue that there is no climate change in 24 months.
Right.
I get elected again. I got another 24. It's when you
Except
start
when you
thinking
have
about your
Harvey-
grandchildren.
Harveys and Irmas.
Well, my husband, and no offense to you,
Yeah.
Harvard grad there,
Yeah.
he says Harvard Business School is turning out all these parvenus that are, you know, upstarts
You
that
won't get any argument from me
that are
about
doing
that.
the
They
short-term
absolutely
bean
are doing
counter,
that.
and that's what they're churning out, and that's the model that
Well,
they
but
seem
that's
to be using.
It's American business. 90 days, make the quarter. Make the quarter. You know, it's
Right.
it's
ethics
tough to
be
find a
damned.
company that
It's-
says, I'm going to look out a couple, 2-3 years. You know,
And that's the, isn't that Paul Ryan mentality, the Atlas Shrugged
It
or
is.
Fountainhead?
Yeah.
You
Dan
know,
Ryan.
the individualist
is.
and all about me and the hell with everybody else.
It's me, me, me.
so how do you change it? How do you change human nature?
Well, how much of it is
There's
human
no-
nature and how much of it is
It's a matter of
particular
how it's-
system that has gotten established that we could possibly all do better if we could change it.
It's a matter of how it's structured. And that is the role of government.
But now you turn around and say, look what happened in Charlottesville.
What about, how's that not?
How does that
Go
relate?
back and say, do the skinheads have a right to protest?
Oh, sure they do.
Mm-hmm.
Sure do.
Absolutely.
So do the people who are offended by the kind of hatred that those folks are preaching.
See,
And
what do they call it, Antifa?
yeah, Antifa.
Antifa. Yeah.
I'm fine. You know, when you say, how do you change a culture? I'm fine if you're protesting, but you're recognizing, and don't get me wrong, there is nothing I can find on that skinhead thing that has any redeeming qualities to me.
No, it's all disgusting.
Except one thing. They're Americans and they have a right to be stupid. That pesky First Amendment. And that what's pissed me off the most is I sat there and I said, as a frustin', I've got to admit they have a right
Absolutely.
Yeah, they
under
do.
the First Amendment to go
Yeah,
out
they
there
do.
and say things that makes me vomit.
They have a right to say things, but they do not have a right to violence.
And there, I'm 100% with you. Because to me, whether it's Antifa or in poopy
You
heads,
can't equate the two. I'm sorry, you can't.
you know,
It-
Carol, I got a hard time when the Antifa people attack the others, then I do equate them. That's when they stop being protesters, either side, and to me they become criminals.
I agree with you that you should not fight fire with fire. But I think it's also a matter of expectation that that if this is all that people, if the hard right or if the white supremacists are expecting violence, they're expecting to create violence, and they will not, if you're not going to fight it in some way with, and I'm not condoning this, but it is an issue. If you're going to fight, if you're going to have Antifa fight the white supremacists, because that's all the white supremacists will understand. If you don't do that, how are you? There are just going to people that are going to be just slaughtered.
But then
I'm not saying
no,
that that's a
I
good.
understand, but what annoys me is people like me who say the far left, the far right, you both have, under the pesky First Amendment, the right to express
do.
your opinion.
Yep.
The minute one of you, and I don't care whose side, crosses the line and tries to stop the other, to me, you're no longer a protester, you're a criminal. And you should crush both of them.
And what they did not do in Charlottesville is that the police did not interfere.
Right. And that makes no sense. Look at Boston. You had far left voicing their opinion.
Miles away.
But you had far left.
Yeah.
And I did not hear that one person from the far left was denied their right to voice their opinion. But you had the far right, and they voiced their opinion. To me, the best way to deal with them is to turn your back like we do in Milford and ignore them. And when they go away, okay.
I'm not sure that's the right way to handle it, though. I mean, we actually, Carol and I actually went to the Boston Common that day, and we didn't see the whole thing because we went to a rally that I think that there were I think some estimates were as many as 40,000 people came.
But what did you and Carol go there for?
So here's what we did. We went to a rally that was in front of the State House that featured about 1,000 or 2 people, I would say. And then there were some speeches, and it was kind of disappointing in some ways because the sound system wasn't very good. We couldn't hear what was being said. But we didn't actually see what later happened, which was the bandstand on the Boston Common was where the people who styled themselves the free speech advocates, who had invited people that it sounded like they were inviting some white supremacists along with some other people. Anyway, there were a few dozen of them on the bandstand, and then there were cordons that the police had set up all in a big arc around the bandstand, and outside that arc there were these thousands and thousands of people.
And the reason that they set it so far apart was that they figured that if people had good, strong arms to throw whatever,
Something they still wouldn't be able
they
to hit
would
anybody.
still wouldn't be able
So
to touch
the whole
them.
thing was managed to physically prevent the two sides from coming to blows.
Or let me say it was
And-
managed so that both sides could have their opinions
Exactly.
That's right.
Exactly.
and not interfere with the
That's right.
others.
That's right.
Exactly.
And which
And we
didn't-
made our point, which is that there are 1,000 of us for every one
For
of
every
them.
one of you.
Right.
And to me, that's the right
I
way
think
to
so
handle
too.
it.
I think so too.
But allowing either side, because to me, you know that gap you talk about in the middle? The minute you step there, you're a criminal. The
And that's
gap
what-
being you're swinging a stick, you're hurting the other side.
So I think what happened in Charlottesville, it sounds like it was much more spontaneous in a lot of ways. I mean, the white supremacists clearly had their organized, and I don't know, I'm just kind of like looking at the two different, I mean, Boston had an opportunity to plan. We had
Yeah.
enough time. We saw what happened in Charlottesville. There was a lot of pushback.
yeah.
So we had advantages in that
We
regard.
did their homework.
I think in Charlottesville, it seemed as though, and not trying to, blame the police, but they seemed to be very slow to respond. Did they know what to do? I don't know, and I don't know how,
Well, and-
But
They
you know what I saw
also-
in Boston? Overwhelming force. The police went in. We
Yeah.
need 3. We're taking 8.
But they were clearly,
And
they
we're
had a
gonna
mission, though. It seemed like they
control.
were more focused.
Yeah.
And say, you over there, do what you want. You over here, do what you want. Don't cross.
Yeah.
But compared to
And they didn't
Charlottesville-
do that. The
And compared to
police didn't-
Charlottesville now,
They didn't stay in the middle. They were not in the middle. They
Right.
were on the outside
Peripheral,
watching
they let everybody
everything.
do their thing. They were,
Well, and in Charlottesville, in Charlottesville, it really was a fascist, white supremacist Nazi bunch that had prepared for violence. They had trained in violent street tactics, and they had people with assault rifles standing by.
You don't hear much nicer about the 1% of the other side.
Well, I'm not
that
talking.
attacked.
What I'm saying is that it's that kind of thing that
Very
you're going to get you're going to get 1% who feel that sort of thing has to be dealt with force, and they'll look back at the fact that these people are flying the same flags that my parents and grandparents' generation went to war to crush those things. We went to war and we lost 400,000 people to crush Hitler and Nazism. And I'll bet you have ancestors who fought in that. All of us do.
Yeah.
And so when some people think that when you see that kind of stuff in the streets of your own city, all bets are off. And I'm not one of them, but
Exactly.
you can kind of understand the rationale.
That pesky First Amendment that
You
says
do.
they have the right, in my opinion, to be stupid. And I have the right to turn my back.
Yep, civil liberties supports them when they do that.
Yeah.
In a
Yeah, I
way
mean,
that it
it's going
doesn't
to kill
harm
the
or influence.
ACLU to
know?
be supporting skinheads.
Oh, you bet it
They,
does.
they don't
Yeah.
support skinheads, they support the right.
But see, they're
to have
supporting the
voice.
First Amendment.
That's
Right.
right.
And that's what
the bigger-
people forget.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
The bitter taste in your mouth is that when we've had these discussions, I have to say, yep, they've got the right
They do.
to do everything that's within the legal limits.
And it doesn't intrude on other people or harm other people.
So we have to hope that by showing up and showing that there are 1,000 of us for every one of them, we can forestall the day when their type of thinking starts to take over. Because that type of thinking did take over in Germany in the 1930s and in other countries as well. And it did get to the point where it silenced and crushed all democratic freedoms, and war became the only way to deal with it.
Now,
So we have to keep from getting to that
along
point
the same
somehow.
lines, maybe you can help me understand, because this sanctuary city, sanctuary state has got me confused along the same lines. Why do I want to protect criminals?
Who said anything about criminals being
You're
protected
making
from
assumptions that
sanctuary
the
cities?
people are criminals.
I'm not hearing that.
So, if I get arrested by the police for a
For what?
violent crime,
No, I just say any crime.
okay.
Any crime.
See, to me, that's where the line comes. If you commit a crime,
Well, define
Then-
crime. Wait. If you're accused of committing a crime, you've not been convicted yet. So you're accused of committing a crime. You're arrested. Where's your due process?
okay, now Christine, follow that logic. If
Okay.
I'm an American citizen, okay, born in Milford, and I'm accused, and I've got somebody who is not an American citizen, why does it feel like we're giving them more rights?
How are we giving them more rights?
How?
Because we don't report them to the federal government.
Why we
Well,
report?
you still
They're
report
me.
they're a part of the federal government when they get arrested. That's considered the government. You're arrested. You're getting processed in the court system.
But if,
Well,
so sanctuaries. Go ahead.
So sanctuaries, this has to do with whether
They're documented.
whether local police are going to be required to turn people in that they suspect of being in the country illegally.
see, now that to
And-
me is a whole different animal.
So-
That is what a sanctuary
But
city
what I
is
keep
about.
reading about Sanctuary City is if I get arrested by the police, instead of sending my name up the hill saying, does anybody, or my fingerprints, does anybody want me to hold this guy or this gal? We're not going to do that. So I could be arrested, fingerprinted, and nobody's going to say anything. But
Well, you're still you're gonna be prosecuted for whatever
You'll
they arrested
go
you
through the
for.
due process.
So you'll go through the same due process that anybody
But it's-
would.
if
but
I
whether
committed
they're-
a murder on the West Coast under
Yeah.
a different name,
Yeah,
I come to the East Coast.
yeah.
They arrest me for a robbery or something. You're not going to ask?
They always do that anyway. They do a
I don't think that's
fingerprint
part
check.
of the
Then what
sanctuary
is
thing.
sanctuary cities about?
It's got to do with undocumented immigrants. It's got to do with people who don't have citizenship. And they report it to ICE.
If you don't, if you engage the local police in reporting any situation regarding an illegal person, immigrant, then that makes the whole city less safe because people will not report those issues.
No, I understand, but we got 11 million undocumented illegal aliens, whatever the correct
Right.
term is. Of that 11 million, 100,000 are criminals.
Some small
1%,
percentage.
less than a percent.
Now, how are you defining criminal?
Well, people who
Violent criminals.
people who
I define
people
it
who
as
committed robbery,
robberies,
So that's what I'm
rape,
saying.
murder.
So violent criminals?
Violent-
I would argue that that's probably a high number, saying that many are violent criminals.
Well, I'm just saying the normal population we were talking is 1% or less,
Okay.
right? So if you got 11 million, I mean,
So-
Portuguese math is 1 million, 1.1 is 10%.
I
So-
don't do math. I'm a social
So
worker.
100,000
110,000. There you go.
people across the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I don't have any sympathy towards protecting that 100,000.
But how are we
I don't think
protecting them?
I don't
It's not
think anybody is
protecting
saying
them.
We're not
anything.
protecting them from the
We're not
crime.
protecting them. Those people who have been arrested and are convicted of a criminal should not be in this country. They should be deported. That's okay. That's not a problem. The problem that Mr. Trump has had is that he has not made any distinction between those people who have actually been convicted of a crime or not. He's just deporting.
See, I go back to our Tom O'Laughlin, our chief, saying 84 years.
84 years, which is-
Let's deal with what's reality. I don't want to scare the local undocumented population because then they won't tell me who are the 0.5% or 1% of bad people.
Yeah.
Right. Who are the people who are beating their
But
girlfriends?
if I
or
opt
wives
into
or
the
who
system
are-
by robbing, whatever, getting accused, whatever, I don't have any sympathy towards not sending my name up to the Fed saying, hey, these fingerprints, were they ever used somewhere else in the country for bad things?
But see, that's the thing.
That's-
If they weren't, so if this person's falsely accused and they're still fingerprinted and part of the process, if your police force is working with ICE, then they're going to be sent up and that person's going to be deported anyway.
Regardless of whether or not.
See, that
they-
I didn't hear. I didn't hear that that person,
It's-
I mean,
You don't get due process first, you get deported first.
we have 11 million people that, if that's the case, how are 11 million people, 10,900,000 hardworking, tax-paying, essentially Americans,
Yeah.
still here? If we could just deport them,
No, because those people aren't, so it goes back to the fact that this person, this hypothetical person, has been accused of a crime. Those folks that are going to school and paying their bills and paying taxes, there's no seen
yeah,
crime
that's what I'm saying.
there.
That nobody's going to arrest them.
Right, but say this person
Unless you're Sheriff
is
Arpaio.
publicly drunk, okay? It's their 21st birthday, they get publicly drunk on the street, they get hauled in. Then we fingerprint them, we process them. They're not a citizen, we send it to ICE because we're a local police force working with the feds. That person can be deported the next day.
See, that's where I have a hard time believing that we would bother.
Well, that's
Now,
why you
if they
have
were
this
driving
push
while
for
they were
sanctuary.
drunk,
But there's no, so if
then
you're,
I have no sympathy.
if you're a member of the police department, your job, first and foremost, is to enforce the law. But it's when you cross the line and you're working with the federal enforcement as part of the local police
And
department
Lisa,
that you
there,
can't
I
make that
believe-
distinction.
I believe that what I've heard several times discussed in town is immigration laws are federal, not local.
Correct.
So the local cops, they've got Joey or Moe or Schmoey. Yeah, I'm not quite sure you're not going to stop them because you're not quite sure they're documented. But if I catch them driving drunk, breaking into a car, attacking someone, yeah, whether you're an American citizen or not, to me, you ought to be fingerprinted. You ought to be run up the system to find out if you've done bad things.
Right, but then
Go ahead.
then it's the getting prosecuted for doing bad things versus having your information reported to the feds and then being deported before you even get processed.
See, that's the part I guess.
So your actual the actual crime that you were accused of never gets
Gets
adjudicated
clarified.
because
You're gone.
You have been
You're gone.
whooshed out of the country.
I mean, and President Obama had the highest deportation rate of any president.
But see, I actually could support what he said when he said, I'm not going after the the illegal aliens that are here working, got their heads down, paying taxes, not causing a problem. But I want to focus on any of them that if they break the rules on top of breaking the rules, yeah.
Okay, so yes, but I think where we're having trouble here is that gray area where breaking a rule is jaywalking versus breaking a rule is robbery.
And to me, it's
There's no-
violent.
there's no
robbery
distinction
to
there.
me falls under that robbery, rape.
Robbery
battery.
isn't that always violent if like you're breaking and entering in a car in the daytime? It's not really.
Even so, but I think we're
talking
also
about-
talking about a gray area of there are shades of gray in to what extent and under what circumstances do local police collaborate with ICE,
Right.
and to what extent do they report people in a way that leads
I
to
gotta look into that for our
ICE
next
latching
talk
onto
to
them
find
because you know this word sanctuary cities. I think if you probably went around and looked at cities that or states that claim to be sanctuaries, you'd probably find a diversity of rules that
Definitions,
they are
yeah.
attempting to
And again,
have.
to me, there's a lot of people in Milford who are here, got their heads down, working hard, not bothering anybody, paying their taxes, trying to make a better life for their family.
That's right.
I can't feel bad about them. Because the only difference
argument
between
here.
them and my grandfather was my grandfather did it right and came through with papers.
I'm sure there were a lot of people back then that also did it
Right.
wrong.
Oh, of course.
What other
and a lot
federal
of
laws
us,
anyway?
our ancestors came here before there were papers.
Right.
You know, I mean,
That's why they had WAP, right?
there were no
Without
laws when my
papers.
ancestors came here about this. That you
Yeah.
just climbed off the
There were
boat and you started living.
percentages. I think back when they were considered quotas, right?
Yep.
So many people from different countries
Well,
were
how do you
allowed
think the Portuguese settled in Toronto? Because at a certain part of the year, they ran out of European visas.
Right.
So they went there.
So
And they had
Canada still
certain-
had
certain-
openings,
and
they
then,
went there.
What is it? And then I think back in the 60s, they allowed, didn't they open it up a little more by allowing people who had relatives already living here? And that kind of opened up the
That
doors.
was
So
my whole
there was an
family.
influx
Once my
again.
mother got here legally, she called her sister, called the other sister.
Right. I
Brought
mean,
them over.
But then they allowed that. But again, it was very different. They just
Be
had quotas
interesting.
and no papers.
I've got to look at this sanctuary city as it affects, like Milford. We're not a sanctuary city. But to say, okay, when do you send up? When do you fingerprint? Because
Right.
I'll admit,
Like find out
I
what the
have
police
gotten
really do.
stopped for speeding. I didn't get fingerprinted.
Yeah, but how was a cavity check?
Yeah, no kidding.
Just saying.
One ticket in 15 years because I was doing 59 miles on the Mass Pike.
Oh, whoa.
At 12:30 at night, coming out of Logan, I found out the tunnels have
Yeah,
a
you gotta go
45 limit.
Oh, man.
So my one ticket in 15
You
years.
criminal, you.
Whoa, when he pulled me aside, he said, you know how fast you were going? I'm in third gear. I couldn't be doing over 60.
Right.
Isn't the speed limit 65? He goes, 45 in the tunnels. But I didn't get arrested. I didn't get fingerprinted. I had to pay my extortion payment, and I'll never go. But interesting.
Yeah.
Look forward to continuing this on our next one.
They'll have to add DACA next time.
Well,
Oh, we
started- that's where we started.
I
We
missed
out
all
on
the
that
good
part.
stuff.
That's where we started.
Hashtag Define America.
As always, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight. Thank you to our 6 loyal viewers for watching. This will be fun. Be interesting when we do the conservative view to hear the exact opposite of
all that.
most of these opinions. So good night all. Thank
Good
you.
night.